Welcome.
Welcome to the Stream of Truth. I am Dr. Tassel Faith Shanebrook.
And I'm Sean Kelly.
And today we are talking about higher conscious communication. And this is really part two of a little series we're doing on the Namaste Method, a method that Sean and I have developed. And really, the cornerstone, the foundation of this method is to really just expand the potentials of how people can interact with each other and how they view relationship. And it's really our orientation of viewing relationship as one of the most powerful vehicles for personal and spiritual growth.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And we spent a bunch of time talking about it on Friday, I think it was. And we didn't get through it all, so we wanted to extend it into today, and try to get through the rest of it. So I think we're going to spend some time to go over the first few points. Should we just jump right into it, or is there anything else you wanted to?
Yeah, I think we'll just review the first 5 points that we were covering in the first video, and then we're going to do several more just to really flesh out all the details of this really, really powerful set of practices. So in the last video, we were making just some distinctions between the Namaste model and the more mainstream traditional relationship models that we both worked with. I have actually a PhD in marriage and family therapy, so I have a lot of background in the mainstream models. And the first 5 points we made in the last video were that this model, this Namaste model, is, as I just said, really this, we view it as a vehicle for growth and expansion, versus just seeing relationship as a relationship and more of like a transactional interaction between people. That was the first point we made.
Yeah.
And then the second point was that in the Namaste model, we're really expanding in the sense of embodying our God self, our highest consciousness available to us, as well as our human self. We're really big enough to hold both of those selves, versus perhaps just only the human self, which might be really what is more recognized in the mainstream models. And then we also made the point of using words such as I have certain preferences in relationship, or even I have certain biases in relationship, rather than talking about the word needs, sort of moving a bit away from the need word. And then talking about holding unconditional acceptance for our partner versus boundaries. And we went a lot into that. It's a little bit controversial to talk about that in a way, but there's more of that in the first video. And then the last point we were talking about is, in this model, really making peace and becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Versus what I find, at least in the mainstream models, there's sort of an immediate rush to put band-aids, in a way, I would say, on discomfort and pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the new points we'll start with is point number 6. Would you like to
Sure.
describe that? Okay.
So this is about basically trying to approach things in a unified way. It's a team approach instead of, or partnered approach instead of me versus them or them versus me, this sort of opposition. Basically, if one of you is struggling, both of you have a problem, or not a problem, but a challenge, something that needs to be, worked through, whatever it is. Because, one person experiencing an issue, it's going to come into it's going to come into that person. It's going to affect them, which means it's going to have a secondary effect on the person that's with them, right? So you can kind of view any issue like in that, anything that comes up in that way. And if both people are doing that, then it becomes more about trying to harmonize than it does about getting our way. And I think part of this is to be careful of the part of us that basically thinks that maybe we have to we can't give as much as well, or we can't give as much space, or we have to make sure we get ours. A lot of times we're like, we have to make sure I get my thing that I want. When if we were to like ease up a bit and be a little bit more natural and peaceful and more see how we can help give what they want, naturally it just opens things up a lot more for you to then tend to get what you want out of it anyway. It's just we tend to like be a little pushy with and focused on what we want, and a lot of times what we want is you know, it's sort of like we think that if we don't get really outward with it that we won't get it, but really we don't have to push so much with that. So it's about noticing some of that and maybe backing away a little bit from what we want, trying to understand that both people, if they approach it this way, you can count on your partner that they're trying to look for ways that they can help you with what you want, just as you're doing with them, right? So that
Yeah,
then there's
it's
this trust that it's
right.
yeah.
It's almost like this energetic orientation that when I'm holding highest and best for my partner, I'm going to receive that back from him or her as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, in this like 3D orientation of like, I need to talk about my needs and get what I need and all that. It can at times feel a bit really self-focused. And
Yeah.
when we can just like sort of loosen that up and just one of my favorite phrases is just the highest and best for all involved.
Yeah.
When we hold that orientation, then we also receive that. Then we receive an orientation of highest and best towards us as well.
Right. And it's really good too because it helps pull out of that transactional. That type of thinking is a bit of transactional a little bit, right?
Yes.
And it can build up a little too when we view the relationship as transactions back and forth, that there's like a currency or a balance of maybe love or whatever distributed between each other. You know, if you've done a few nice things or loving things and the other person hasn't really, who knows why, but they haven't really done that much. If we're viewing it transactionally at all, that's going to start to make us feel like we're out of balance, right? Like we're giving and giving because we're noticing that they're not as well. And so you can imagine like if you're stepping back from that and sort of not viewing it transactionally, that you're just giving because it felt nice to give. It's not like you were probably not giving in order to get something, right? And then the mind starts to, you know, create this thing like, oh, they must not want to give to me, or maybe they're not as kind, or maybe they're not being kind, or maybe they're upset, or starts to form some of these types of ideas. But that all comes from viewing these things as well as transactional, like I gave you one, now where's mine? That type of thing. And it can end up just sort of creating again the opposition dynamic. So, and it's very subtle, right? Like and I'm not saying that sometimes we do fall into these thoughts. Like it's really very, very normal and normative for all relationships for us to like approach here and there with our desires at the forefront, or noticing maybe someone else isn't doing stuff that we think that if we were them, we would probably do. That's another challenging thing. Like if I was in that position, I would probably think to do this and give to me in this way. And so we're noticing some of the behaviors that are different too. And that can be challenging. So there's a bunch of different layers to it.
That's a really good point. I think that has been a bit challenging, I would say, for me, that I think I'm getting
Right.
better at it, but I think I sometimes would approach things like, you know, why can't he do this? Like
Yeah.
that's what I would do. And yeah, that's such a expansion to just really understand that
Yeah.
everyone's different.
And I can share on my side, I can feel Like I'm a very understanding person. Like I can feel like I'm pretty, like I don't tend to blame people first. I tend to go, why are they being this way? That tends to always be my orientation. Always like, I wonder what it is about their experience that has caused them to be this way. And in that way, I'm almost always a little compassionate, a little bit concerned for them is more the energy that I'm approaching when people are like being weird to me. In many ways, it sort of depends. And so I can feel that when like other people don't seem to take that approach with me, right? So like, these things are we all have these types of things that basically like I feel like I'm a fairly understanding, and I try to orient that way so that I'm always wondering about what they're doing, kind of knowing that I'm not so sure and trying not to make a story out of it. And then I can feel like other people don't really do that as much, and so it can be a frustrating world because if I was them, I would give me a lot of passes on things, I think, right? Because I would know, but anyways, the point is that yeah, we have these, and it comes back to our expectations of what we're going to get from them, right? And that's just that's a transactional way of seeing it. It's lovely when we get stuff from them, but when we're like oriented to wanting it, that's when we notice when it doesn't come up, and it causes that imbalance. If we're more focused on like just giving and just knowing that when it's great, then it'll all come in, then it can be a lot of a more peaceful experience. Not that desiring it is wrong. Um, it's just sort of, that's what tends to cause the seesaw, right? Like we desire and then it builds up, and then when we don't get it, we start to feel this lack. Um, and yeah, but we're getting into other other stuff now. But um, yeah, it's all
Yeah,
interesting stuff.
a lot about grace and patience and also just a lot about sourcing from yourself, really, I think as well. Um and looking at the relationship as sort of the icing on the cake.
Hmm.
Um and along with what we're saying here, this team approach is, I think, also to really be aware of each other's strengths and maybe each other's more evolving sets of skills, and to sort of leverage those in the most benevolent way. So, like between you and me, where we kind of have different personalities in a lot of ways. You have certain strengths, I have certain strengths, and just like looking at us as a team and how we can really maximize each other's strengths, say in our business or just in our relationship, rather than needing the other person to like be like us.
Yeah, and also understanding inherently that just because the other has a strength, it doesn't mean you have to like meet that strength and become as good as them at this thing either, right? Like
Yes,
because
that's
we can
really
compete with
good.
our partners a lot, accidentally set up this dynamic of internally seeing them as a competitor in these different arenas through that, or we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves that's just unnecessary. Like, it's hard to observe people that are good at things that we want to be good at, and they're better at it than us naturally, and just seems to be fine. So that can be challenging for us, right? So, like, getting off our back a little bit about that helps.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting topic that I just haven't heard people talk about too much. Jealousy towards your intimate partner and
Yeah,
how that can play out and how that can affect things, and to like just honor, if you do feel jealous, honor your human and what your human is feeling, but sort of back to this place of living more in, I don't really need to compare myself to anyone,
right.
including my partner.
Well, right. Yeah, that's sort of the best place to be at. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many dynamics. Oh my gosh. It's just like a petri dish of
Yeah.
human dynamics and all this. Okay. The next point is holding this orientation, this outlook of relationship as expansive and not constrictive. And I know in previous relationships, and maybe even in our relationship more in the beginning, I think felt I had certain needs and I wanted them to be honored and met. And I think if that feels like just really rigid, that can start to feel very constricting to a relationship. Like then there are rules that need to be followed, and each partner might feel, oh, I really need to tiptoe around my partner in this particular issue, or I better make sure I do this.
Or even to its worst side, sorry to interrupt, I just had to share this. My experience was I used to fib, right? I would like white lie about, not in our relationship, but in past relationships.
Yeah.
Like an example that I gave, I think, to Tassel the other day was like, maybe I stayed late at work because I just wanted to eat a sandwich. Like I had some leftover food and I like decided to, at the end of my work day, instead of just getting up and going straight home, I decided to sit and eat a sandwich at my computer, probably looking at Reddit or something. And so I
Yeah.
ate my sandwich, relaxed a little bit, and then drove home. Instead of saying, when I arrived home, instead of telling the truth of what I did, oh, why were you late? So and so needed some help at work, so I just stayed a few extra minutes. Like, so the lie is sort of meaningless, really. The only reason that I lied was because I didn't want to get into this whole thing, because there were rules around what was okay for me to be late for, and it was not to relax for a minute. Like that was not okay for me to be late that way. That was not okay, and it was very clearly not okay. So it wasn't like I was making it up, but I had basically been told more or less over many experiences that that's not okay to be late for that reason. So, uh, you know, I eventually got to a point where I started to just, I'll just say these little fibs, right? That in order to just keep it smooth, because I didn't like, I wasn't gonna be controlled by that rule, but the rule just more, I just was like, well, I just won't talk about that then. I won't say that I'm doing that, right? I'll just say other things. It makes no difference because I could see, I think, even back then, that the whole thing was like not, it was like it didn't align, it didn't make any sense. And so I was like, justified to me, I felt okay with just lying, basically. And so in its extreme, yeah, it creates, I'm an avoidant personality in many ways. And I have tendency to avoid like stuff that feels, ugh. And that those conversations would feel really shitty when I would come home, get in trouble for having a sandwich or something. And I'm not trying to speak poorly, but it was stressful. So there was a lot of reasons that I would get that type of feedback when I was late. So it's not like one-sided like that. But at the time, I just was like, well, I worked all day too, and I felt, how I felt justified anyway. But that was what I wanted to say, was that at its worst, it starts to create an avoidance of it. They'll just deny it. They won't, you won't have the openness because there's enough of a barrier built up there that now they won't even broach that subject with you, or they'll pretend as if that subject isn't a part of their life, or who
Yeah,
knows.
and this can even, lead to people having affairs because
Mm-hmm.
they feel so oppressed and constricted in their primary relationship and they don't know what to do about it. And not to like, excuse all of that, but just to say there's a context in which these things happen. People just don't do these things
Yeah.
out of
If you
nothing.
if you have a partner that's, very deceptive and lying to you, it may be worth considering. Am I very reactive emotionally? In like,
Yes,
do
yes,
I kind of fly off the handle a lot when they just tell
yes.
me what they did that day? Or You know,
How are we possibly co-creating the
mhm.
entire
it's
situation?
it's not
Whatever that.
to it's not to justify what the other person's
Right,
doing. It's just
right.
to like have some self understanding around how am I
Yeah,
contributing. Like everything's co-created, so if the partner's acting that way and deceiving and hiding, they must
yeah,
not feel safe. They
yeah.
must not, because why else would they hide, right?
And of course there are like more ideal ways to handle that, but
Right.
just to like understand behavior always has a reason.
Yeah,
There's
the
always a reason
the
for
first step
behavior.
is to see it for what it is and
Yes,
notice, back to what we were beginning this topic with, was expansive versus constrictive. Is this behavior that I'm bringing to the relationship constrictive? If
yeah,
so, it's understandable the other person responds with a fear-based response of avoidance or whatever it
yeah,
is, because it's
yes,
being constricted. So when it's expansive, then then it's not going to be met with resistance like that. So yeah, it's
yeah.
really, really
And
important.
it's the human personality, the thinking mind that thinks if we apply rules to things, we will feel safer. And we see this in every aspect of our lives. We see it right now with what's going on sort of internationally with the current topics of the day. If we apply more rules, we'll feel more safe. And usually that maybe not is not the case and sort of creates more problems in a way.
Yeah, we kind of think if we give a rule, the other person will probably abide it, or they'll try to, and then that way we've mitigated that risk of being triggered, really, right?
Yeah, it's just to try to it's always to try to avoid some type of pain, usually
Yeah,
emotional pain. Um, and the way I'm seeing it now, it's almost like this great, beautiful challenge. Can I expand enough? Can I grow enough that I can hold what my partner really, who he or she really is naturally?
right.
And can,
Yeah,
can I expand? And not to say that there aren't times when harmonization is sort of important and a little bit of give and take, a little bit of compromise. I think that's also part of what is called for, but almost this challenge like, how big can I grow to just hold who my partner naturally is?
yeah, yeah, and some of it too, I think, can feel a little bit like some of the stuff I really like, my partner maybe not naturally do as much as I might like them to, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, like, probably they do want to give you things that you enjoy and like. Most likely, if they're seeing things like this and you guys are in this type of relationship, they're wanting to do what you enjoy generally, right? More or less, they're, because you're both kind of approaching it from that, let's make sure the other person is served. Let's serve each other. In that way, we're both served, right? And if we can kind of approach it all the time that way, then we're okay. And so the other person may have characteristics about them that um, don't feel so natural to you. Like something for between Tassel and I, Tassel can feel very planny. Like she likes to make the plans for later, because it helps her to know, like, it helps her to feel comfortable to know, like, an outline. She totally understands that the plans may not occur exactly how they're lined up and all that, but just to do all that helps her to feel like content with things. And I can, like, to the point of not even really consider those things that much. And so sometimes we can get into situations where, like, she's kind of wanting us to plan something, and I'm not even thinking about plans really. Uh, and that could be either she may feel like I don't want to plan, or she may feel like I'm being negligent by not planning, or it could be a bunch of different things. And then I could feel like maybe she's planning too much, or what's with all the plans. And so we have this dynamic between us that like I'm not so good at the plan. I used to be very good at planning and all that. I was a very analytical mind, but I've shifted a lot, and it doesn't feel right to me so much anymore. And it's fine. And I think that's all I'm trying to say is like accepting these differences. It doesn't mean that the other person has to like let go of how they naturally are. It's more like accepting how they are as they are and just like helping each other with it. So like there are areas that Tassel has said before that she would benefit in being more flowy or intuitively oriented. And there are areas I have said many times that I should be more practical, more logically oriented or methodical maybe in my approach to things. So together we can help balance that, right? And that's why we have that dynamic, and that's why actually attraction happens. So you're gonna have these dynamics between you. So acknowledging that and like learning how to like notice what they are and then be okay with what they are as they are, knowing that your partner may not be able to expand very well. Maybe they don't care to expand in this area. Maybe like I could be in a more of a state where like, sorry, babe, I don't plan stuff. I don't do that. And can she accept that? Right. So it becomes the challenge on us to accept others to the degree that we feel comfortable. It's our sort of tolerance really to what we can hold. And that's why I really liked your expansion, because as we expand more, we can hold more of ourselves. If we remember, we're only observing ourselves, we're holding more of ourselves, and we're holding our triggers that come up, our sensitivities. We're holding all of that and still expressing love. And then, that's, I think, if your goal is that, then you're set.
Well, and this is how we really, I think, further embody our God self.
Totally.
Your description that you just gave, when we're able to hold our own pain, to hold our own triggers. Not to say that we don't ever discuss it, but we kind of hold it first.
Yeah.
And then see if it warrants discussion, and then still be unconditionally loving and accepting.
Yeah.
It's such an amazing expansion.
We have to look at it in ourselves first. That's why everyone always says, this is what they mean when they say go within, to like there's so much you can learn and all that, but the healing happens within, right?
Yeah.
So when we're healing, all we're really needing to do is look at our thoughts and adjust the perception. That's really all we're ever doing when we're healing. We're forgiving ourselves, basically. That's all that's ever happening. It's super important.
That what can go really hand in hand with this Namaste model is also just this orientation of inner partnership. And I've done a video on the channel on inner partnership, but when we can look to ourselves as our own best friend, as our own mother, as our own, just whatever we need, it loosens everything up for our partner. The partner doesn't have to be everything, because we're really sovereign and we're really fundamentally sourcing from within and from our connection to source. So I think like those two practices can really just be really complementary to each other. These sets of communication practices, and then your own inner partnership with yourself. It really takes a lot of the pressure off the relationship. Okay, the next point, I think maybe we've already covered it. Comfort.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that.
Okay.
That was probably number 5, I think, or so.
Yeah. So why don't we go to number 9?
Sure. Is it my turn or yours?
I think it's yours.
Okay. Humbleness and curiosity. Oh, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, humbleness and curiosity, and need to be right, self-centeredness. I'd like to just share that in myself, I've seen so much arrogance over my years, just such an immature arrogance. And the universe is lovely because it always humbles you in your arrogance. So whenever you sort of think you know anything, the universe will usually turn that upside down some way. Whenever you're certain about certain things, you'll realize something will just blow your mind and blow that apart. And so that kind of keeps you humble. But you only really need to reflect on your experience to notice this, that whenever you sort of felt safe by your construction of security, that something rattles it and you realize that it wasn't quite as secure as you thought it was. So if you can just notice a lot of that and just return to humbleness, like, I like to think of humbleness literally as just realizing that we're like, I like to think of us as like spiritual children, where a lot of us don't even know we're in spiritual school. We don't really know what we're doing. We think that the objective is to get the biggest, best toys. Like we don't really understand what's going on here, as a society. And then as individuals, we're like, a lot of us are just starting to get like glimpses of what could be called understanding, fourth density understanding. We're getting glimpses of it. And, remembering, like, as amazing as we are, we're super amazing, but we don't know anything. It's always important to really remember we don't know anything. We don't know what the other person's really doing, what they're experiencing. We have a tendency to presume their experience is how ours is. And that's obvious. It's very easy to do that. It's hard to actually not do that in many cases. It's hard to, you almost have to really know the person quite well to be able to put yourself into a sort of their persona and then perceive events from their lens. And even then, it's still just a lot of guesswork, right? So just remaining very humble, like your offerings are offered to them to help them as best you can, but you know that you don't necessarily have any idea. You don't have more understanding than them. You're not more evolved. You're not better than them in any way. You're both totally equal in all respects. And they may be struggling right now, or maybe you're struggling right now. But either way, you're sort of in it together, and just not, no one's, even if you are sort of helping them a little bit, like let's say you offer something insightful and then they realize something and say, oh, that's great, I realized this. You didn't realize it for them, right? Like you didn't give that to them. They realized it. You had nothing to do with it. And so it was that other being that called for this information, you let it out, and they grasped it, right? And brought it in. So you didn't do anything. We have this tendency to think that we're helping people, and that's not quite how it works. And just remembering a lot of like, I don't really know what's going on. And because I don't know what's going on, it's amazing, because I can just always be very curious at what people are experiencing. And if I'm not curious, probably, I might be getting hurt by something. And if I'm getting hurt, try to then go, I can be curious about this too. And, approaching your hurt with the same curious acceptance. Like, I accept that this is what is occurring, and I'm very curious to know why this is so painful for me. A lot of times, especially a little bit later, we can get into little conflicts with our partners, and we're not even really sure why we're upset at the beginning. This is usually because the trauma is so disconnected from the event that's happening right now that the tie isn't totally there. It's more subconscious. But suddenly we're triggered, and then we have to kind of explore, why did that trigger me so much? But all that curiosity about your partner's experience, about your own experience, of their experience, and all of it together, having that approach, just, I think, or we think, is sort of the better way to try and orient yourself. And noticing, I'm noticing your own arrogance as well. Like I have a tendency to think I know, and especially as we like awaken, we'll have all of our realizations, we all have different ones at different times. Eventually, we all know the same thing, but we all have our different things that are insights and whatever. It is possible that one person's had an insight that the other person hasn't had yet, of course. And what happens is the person that's had that insight can see that other person has not had that. Usually it's a resolution of a paradox of some kind, but the other person can sort of see that hasn't quite happened and sort of think, I know, and I could tell them, and all that stuff. And it's sort of like it's usually very subtle because we're just trying to help, but it's a self-centeredness. It's like it's a I know best here, and let me teach. And I've fallen into this trap a lot, and that's why I think I'm talking about it so much, is because I feel that I am here to try and teach, right? That's primarily why I'm alive. And so that's great, but I can fall into teacher mode at very inappropriate times. Like I can fall into teacher mode because part of the reason that I do that is because I'm stepping into my higher perspective and observing it from that perspective. And then I'm sort of not so in the moment. So it can actually be a little bit of a crutch for me. I'm pulling out of that human experience a little bit in order to observe it from the other perspective. And so it can actually be a little bit of a avoidance for me of discomfort in some cases. And so it's a huge one, noticing your own self-centeredness. And even when you have desires that you like feel like I have to tell my partner what they have to do, that's very self-centered, right? And it's not necessarily inappropriate to do so. It's appropriate to just consider, is this like we are all self-centered on a spectrum. In some moments we're concerned only with what we are trying to do or achieve. In other moments we're concerned with how we can serve others. We are all doing that. Each moment we're sort of contributing one or the other. All of that's serving the creator, and there's no polarity. So all we have to really do is say, this feels like I need something. Yes, it's my need, but I think my partner would want to serve me this way as well. Or maybe they don't, but basically just thinking about, is this need something that I do feel is important to bring up and talk about? That's really all it is. Like whenever whenever we need stuff, it's of course self-centered because it's our need, it's our thing. Like it's like that's like if that wasn't self-centered, or it would be like saying that when we need to eat and I want to eat something, and then we go eat something, that's not self-centered. Of course it is. But and so I'm just accepting that, yes, I'm self-centered. I'm a self-centered being. We all are. And recognizing when it's there, and then just like looking at it really closely, like, am I being self-centered? Is it out of balance here? Or am I just trying to respect myself and empower myself a little bit too? Right? Like it's not a bad thing to be focused on yourself, to serve yourself. You often have to serve yourself first in many cases before you can serve others.
Yeah, there's so many nuances here.
So many.
I think you and I have talked about this a lot, that on the path of awakening, there's this stage of empowerment and self-sovereignty that we enter into that's really crucial. And then perhaps when we come back into conscious partnership, we have to kind of balance all of that with highest and best for all. And these two orientations we're talking about, humbleness and curiosity, have really been new learnings for me over this past year with you that have just come out of our relationship. And just balancing all of that, like my own empowerment, my own sovereignty, and just humbleness and always curiosity about what's going on with me? What's really here? What's really my own wounds? What's my own old stories? What maybe is something that could be most benevolent for our relationship to maybe shift a little bit? What's going on for you? I just love the idea of curiosity. It loosens everything up. It makes everything not so crisis oriented.
Yeah.
um, like when your painful feelings come up, if you've been triggered, can I honor, okay, I'm feeling that. And can I also take a step back and just have some curiosity about what is going, just a little, I'm not being engulfed by the feeling, but I can also simultaneously hold curiosity about what's going on for you. These are all like, I just feel very like advanced practices for us as souls to feel into all of these. It's exciting, and it's so expansive to feel into all of these orientations simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's badass. I'll just say it's
And I
badass.
just wanted to elaborate a little bit. This is a bit more esoteric,
Okay.
but it is relevant, and I think it's important for people that are interested in going this route. But basically, I think when we can start to, after we come into our sovereignty, what we usually have happen is we still are perpetuating lots of identity, lots of stories in narratives that we haven't resolved. So we'll usually
Yeah.
overcorrect and think we need to be very rigid in things
Yeah.
because we have just recently took power over our lives, right? We have just
We've taken
recently,
back our power. Yeah.
right? So we've just recently stepped back into our power, and
Yeah.
at that point, though, we are usually very still identified with a lot of different narratives, of different stories, traumas, whatever they were. I have to do this because this happened before. I want to prevent this, and there's lots of that worry, a little bit like lingering, usually. And so what ends up happening though is you can, in your sovereignty, like choose. You start to realize, oh, these are just really choices. Really, what I like to think of it as, I'm basically molding, like the ego doesn't go away. In order for us to experience uh, separation, we have to have identity, right?
Yeah.
So the ego has to identify for us to experience things to some degree. And so it's really just a question of noticing, like, when I get upset, when I get triggered by things, there's a story here, and I'm going to observe the story, and then I can choose, am I ready to let this go and forgive everyone of this? Am I able to basically pretend or know that this thing is basically meaningless to me now? Like, that's where it's going to get to. If you've truly forgiven, it's more or less meaningless. It's a thing that occurred. And it's no different than, like, I got the mail yesterday. It's a thing that happened. And when it's forgiven as, like, to a purity, then that's how you'll reflect on it. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean whatever. It just means your feeling about it. It's not going to bring up all the feeling. But you end up just being able to choose these things. And so as we step out of the sovereignty, you start to be able to be like, okay, now I became maybe a little rigid, very powerful and empowered. Maybe now I can relax a bit of this, right? And step a little, and open up some of the boundaries. And that's where I think the expansion starts to really happen. And then, as we go, we realize, oh, every time I do this, it's better. So it just becomes self-evident that, oh, I can continuously go into the narratives, heal the narratives, let go of them, and continue along with my partner who did the same thing or did a similar behavior that triggered me with my partner before. But it doesn't have to trigger me now because I know the meaning is not the same. It's not the same occurrence, even though the actions seem very samey. With a different person, it's a whole new experience, right? And we can just notice that, be curious about it, and humble, and just be like, oh, okay, I actually don't know this moment. I thought I knew this moment because of my past, but I actually don't know what they're doing and intending, and what they're saying this or not saying that, or what they did yesterday, that I felt pain from. It doesn't have to be that pain, and I can notice that it's within myself, and then look at that and decide, like, maybe it really is something. I can't speak for anyone, but what I'll say is, like, it could be something that you're just not ready to let go of yet, right? Like, so, like, if I were to be very, very abrasive language to Tassel, let's say, like very rude and like yelling at you and calling you names and stuff, that would probably be a little much for you to accept, right? There are boundaries and there are things like that. And so it doesn't, and that's where you start to balance, like, you open up without being walked on. And as you open up with a trusting, loving connection, you realize they won't walk all over you regardless of how open you are. They're not going to come tread on you and disrespect you that way, at least not in any purposeful way. They're only going to sit with you and try to move forward together. And yeah.
Yeah. And I think this actually touches on a whole nother really important point that I think we should add to this, is that your relationship with yourself, you're going to see your partner interact with you that way. So
yeah,
how not to get walked all over is, how are you interacting with yourself? How are you respecting yourself? How are you loving yourself? So that should probably be another point in this list.
totally. Yeah.
Essential foundation of your relationship with yourself.
And
as within, so without.
And that's why once you see yourself as creator and start to remember that and feel that as much as possible, and then you realize, oh, everyone is this with me, then you start to just have sort of a very more surreal experience of knowing that I'm accepting this person. That actually is me loving myself. I'm accepting myself, and it's all that mirror stuff that all those people have always been saying to us.
Yeah.
Life's a mirror that we couldn't really fully understand before. Suddenly goes, oh shoot, I get it. And so yourself, and then once you can do that, then you can open up to accept others as much. These radical acceptance. Yeah.
Totally. Wonderful. Okay, the next point is,
I'm in like a cave now.
Oh, do you have a light over there?
It would look weird if I turned it on. It's all right. I'm just in the darkness. We got the polarity going. That's all.
You are the light in the darkness. Your light cannot be extinguished. Okay, the next point, we have a few more, is we've already talked about this a bit, but the emphasis of this model, this way of being, really is on inner work first. Always inner work first, inner work first, inner work first, versus the models that I've worked with as a couples therapist from the mainstream orientation, they didn't really emphasize that really at all. It would be more like, okay, I'm feeling something, I need to communicate it like immediately. And somehow we need to work it out. But this model, as we've been saying so much, is just really, oh, what is going on with me? What feelings are arising in me? Can I sit with this discomfort without the rush to immediately talk to my partner?
And the best thing about it, in my experience, like, is like the less chance there is that I'm going to be like regretful later about stuff that I've said.
Oh my gosh.
Because
I think I made a joke with you, because I'm so into fasting and cleansing as well, is like, just keep your mouth shut. Like, keep your mouth shut with immediately needing to say things. Keep your mouth shut at times to just give your body a rest digestively. So like for me, just keep my mouth shut sometimes. I don't always have to like share everything. I don't always have to eat all the time. So it's just like my favorite practice. Keep my mouth shut.
I try to remember whenever I'm thinking about whether or not I'm supposed to speak my truth right now,
Mhm.
I remember Thoth said, those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak. And I was like, whoa. So I always remember that. And to me, it's meant to be a veiled little bit of a mystery. It's, but it always reminds me that when I'm not seeing love, I don't know. And so I shouldn't speak. I'm not sure why that totally reminds me of that, but basically, when I'm not seeing the moment as loving, I'm not seeing love in the moment, I'm confused. So I need to relax. Like, I'll talk if I have to, but generally, I'm gonna want to understand my own confusion before I speak.
Yeah, we had a moment last night. Last night, we sort of had a difficult interaction in large part because I was feeling some painful things in our relationship, and I was in a bit of a story, I think, and I wasn't really communicating using my own techniques that we're talking about here. And I wasn't totally coming from love, I think. There was some, I think, blaminess
Well, and sometimes
and
I think I just want to say sometimes, like, if basically not if I'm speaking lovingly, it's more like I feel really bad. I'm not in love. I'm not seeing love right now. I'm seeing my despair or my regret or my whatever it is, my guilt. It could be whatever we're seeing. It's not love, and so I must be confused about something.
yeah,
That
and
yeah.
in our interaction last night, um, there was a point where I asked, I said something, I apologized to you, and I think I asked if you could forgive me or something, and I just felt like this like rush of, I don't know, like compassion towards you and me, and just I got back to love. Basically, I would say is like I just somehow got back to love, and then you seemed like you got back to love too. It was really interesting, like just how we create the tenor, the tone of the interaction so easily, stepping out of love, coming back to love, and how just being humble and apologetic as appropriate, and stepping back into love, and a more neutral way of talking, or the curious way of talking rather than it could be a little more blamey way of talking, just how that changes things so quickly. Like in a few instances, in a few moments, it seemed like we'd come back together after being a bit polarized.
Hmm.
So, uh, yeah, it's really helpful to come back to love. Um, do you want to do the next one about the facts?
Stick to the facts. um, and
Okay.
basically avoid assumptions and stories, potentially unconscious uh, patterns or presence in stories and assumptions. Basically, I think it's potentially unconscious patterns. I think is what we wrote down. I think the wrong word, but basically, like paying attention to. Sometimes we'll take sort of the facts, like it's almost like it's I don't know, it's a burger, right? And the facts is it's just a burger with cheese on it or something, a veggie burger if you prefer. Um, and we start to add flavor to it, like we put all this sauce on it. It's kind of like that with our stories, and food is nice, but the stories can be kind of icky, right? So we're kind of putting we unconsciously we see the burger come and we go, oh, I know what the burger looks like. It's got this on it, some shame on it, some guilt on it, and some regret and some this. And then that's my story now. That's my experience now becomes this melding of the truth with this amorphous sort of fog of an old story that was bad when you had a bad experience sometime that formed a fear around this type of interaction or this experience. And so trying to notice, like, when we're applying negative meaning, when we're applying meaning to things in general, it has to be a story for us to experience anything at all. And the story we can pick the story. And but in order to do that, we have to let go of older stories. And so we talked about this a bunch, so I'm not going to go ton into it, but just the sticking to the facts allows you to just it really contrasts the stories. If like
It really like pulls you out of a story. If you just
yeah,
repeat that phrase to yourself when you're triggered, stick to the facts,
yeah, don't
then I'm not going to go down that crazy route of a big story here.
we are
What
told
actually happened?
we're told by the mind, this happened because this happened because this happened because, so it's
These
natural.
were their intentions.
Yeah.
We're assuming intention. Yeah.
And it's natural for the mind to do that. That's how the mind guesses at what's occurring and guesses at what's going to happen and predicts, and that's how it is useful, right? But when we start to learn how it's doing that, it's not doing it to hurt us, it's doing it to keep us safe, right? And so it's our survival. It's it's our animalistic component of us. It's assessing and analyzing and going, oh, this looks like this time, and therefore this is what's going on. And just sort of stepping away from that and going, no, the person, like I could use an example, like let's say that I said to Tassel, I'm going to run out to the store. I should be pretty quick. I'll be right back. And then like an hour goes by, and maybe I was out at the store and I saw something and I wanted to go check it out, and I thought maybe I was going to get her a present for something, and I was taking a while, and then I started talking to the person in there, and they were talking about something, and it was interesting, and then anyways, I took a bunch of time, let's say. On Tassel's end, she would probably be like, what the hell's going on? And have this, it'd be very, very easy to be like, he didn't tell me, he's going to take forever, he doesn't respect me, he doesn't, whatever, right? It could be any list of things, when really I was just out doing stuff. That's all that happened. I was inaccurate with saying, I'll be back in 15 minutes or something. I wasn't like, when I said that, I was, I was intending at that moment to be quick. And then the moments changed and stuff happened and I wasn't quick. It's not like I went out there to go be forever and cause this whole thing, right? And so I'm using that example because that's exactly something that I would do. And this is exactly the type of thing that I get caught up in doing accidentally all the time. And so Tassel's generally very, very patient with me with this stuff. So I'm not implying that she often does this either. But, it's very easy to notice that, oh, it means these things that he did or she did, whatever, mean that they feel this way or that they don't feel this way. Like, they don't respect me because if they respected me, they would have texted me, or I would have occurred to them to do this or that. When really I'm just a bit of a flighty kind of, ooh, shiny, and, kind of person a little bit when it comes to just being out and about. And so,
And at the same time, we can honor what is arising for us.
Totally.
Run that through our own system, and it may feel helpful to share, oh, when you do this is what I experience.
Right.
But not to put our own assumptions on what the person was intending or meaning. But
that's what I was going to get to. Yeah. Like,
what does arise for us?
I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've gotten better and better at this type of thing where I'm a little more like, this is happening, I'm going to be delayed, or I'm currently delayed. I'm or more just attentive in that way when I'm not meeting the times. I think I've gotten better, and that was sort of my point, is that talking
And
about it, if we didn't talk about it, I wouldn't have even known that there was any issue. I would have just been like, this is great. She doesn't do the thing that everyone else I've ever met has done to me, which has been, been upset by these types of occurrences, which I don't know how to stop. So, so,
and then at the
yeah,
same time, it's in a way invited me to be a little more easygoing and loose about time, which I think is an expansion that my soul has wanted me to have. So we can see how this situation has expanded both of us,
right. Yeah,
right?
totally.
And that's just so much of what we're talking about here. Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, the next point, we're almost done. We have 2 more points, is in this Namaste model, there is a real emphasis, a real focus on remaining open-hearted versus withdrawing or like protecting ourselves in a more like 3D way. And this phrase I really love: lead from the heart, not from your hurt. And so much of this really is about being comfortable, being vulnerable. And to me, vulnerable just means I'm being truthful. I'm being open-heartedly truthful.
Hmm.
Um, like last night, we were having a bit of a tricky conversation between each other, and I said to you something like, "Do you know when you might be able to come to Nashville to visit me?" And it felt really vulnerable to say that because things were a little tricky between us, and I felt almost a little like, I don't know, I just felt a little vulnerable to ask you to come see me in that moment. But that was the truth. Like I really wanted to ask you that, and I want you to come see me. Um, and so I was able just to be really truthful in that moment and vulnerable. And what I always like to say is when we're open-hearted and vulnerable, we don't have any war inside of us. We're at peace. Because for instance, let's say I hadn't said that, but I wanted to, I'd be sort of like all conflicty inside, like, oh, I really do want to ask him that, but I'm a little bit scared. I feel vulnerable right now. What if, I don't know, what if he says something that feels hurtful? I'm kind of at war with myself. I'm not really aligned within my own heart, my own desires. And it's not to say that we might not feel hurt. That might happen. And in fact, I think I did feel a little bit hurt by what your particular response ended up being. Not that it was bad or anything. It just, anyway. But to me, I would rather feel at times hurt from the external than to live in internal conflict. So that's the way I sort of make peace with it, is that I am going to keep my heart open as much as possible towards everyone. Um, Not to say if there is sort of traumatic behaviors going on externally that I'm just going to, jump right into that. I'm going to have boundaries where it is important. But in general, with healthy, conscious people that I'm engaged with, I'm going to keep my heart open, and I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be truthful. I'm going to wear I say this to you all the time, I wear my heart on my sleeve. Maybe not in every single second, but mostly I feel like do practice that. I really do wear my heart on my sleeve. And sometimes I do feel hurt, but I live internally in peace. I live internally in peace. I'm not all tied up in knots inside. And the more I show up to other people with an open heart, the better chance we have of connecting and the better chance we have of exchanging love between us. So I just want to always show up the best I can. Even though I might get hurt sometimes, I just want to show up in the best way I know how, no matter what. Again, embodying as much as possible my God self. I'm going to show up in love as much as I can.
Awesome. Awesome. And then the last point is that the relationship ideally helps each one of us come back to ourselves and source it. And so we're best friends. And so basically you know, everything that we're doing, we're framing. We've talked about this a little bit, but we're framing it around. We're doing things together, coming together to ultimately to love ourselves more too. Like that the relationship is basically here. It's not so much that like we're gonna have a partner to go like do stuff with, but more than that, we're having a partner that helps us to see ourselves and help somebody that's safe for us to do that with. That's probably the most valuable part of it, because you can imagine talking about a lot of these difficult things with someone who's not that safe to talk about with this stuff with, somebody that's very critical of you or something. You're going to have a lot of struggle with that. And so the method is to get rid of that critical them versus me oriented way of thinking at all, to try to dissolve a lot of that into a more unity based approach, a higher consciousness approach. And because the goal, the reason you're here on the planet is to remember who you are, remember yourself, and to love yourself. So this partner or these other people are the tools that you are offered to look at yourself. And if you can respect them in that way, then it becomes a lot more difficult to get really upset with them as well.
I love the phrase, "We are all walking each other home." That phrase just
Oh
makes me
yeah,
want to
that's really
cry.
cool. I've never heard
And
that, I don't think.
in this type of conscious relationship that we're talking about, you and me, we're just walking each other home, back to ourselves, back to God. And what could be more beautiful? I'm going to cry right now.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. And I think I'm totally crying. I think just you have helped me really embody more and more of my God self. And I'm really grateful.
I love you.
Thank you. All right. Should we stop there?
And you've helped, I should say you've helped me a lot as well. And I'm very grateful also. If I should say that, you know, these lessons, these things that we talk about are formed from our experience, whether it's professionally or just through this type of, like, we've talked about all of this stuff and worked through it ourselves together pretty much, right? So you know, it's all come from exactly what we're talking about here, which is the pathway back to ourselves and walking each other home. So yeah, I think it's the point of everything.
Yeah. It's big.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um, Thank you so much for joining us on this video. If you enjoyed the video, we'd so appreciate you subscribing to our channel or liking the video. And we also have an amazing Patreon community.
And this course will, yeah,
Yeah, this coming Thursday night, we're going to be doing basically like a 90-minute to 2-hour, very in-depth course on the Namaste Method. We'd love for you to join us.
yes. Hope to see you there.
Okay, so much love to everybody.
Bye.